Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you Mr. Gregory Lopez. He is a practicing secular Buddhist and Stoic, and kind of my go-to guy when I want intersection questions. He is the founder and facilitator of the New York City Stoics. He is the co-host of the Stoic Camp New York. He is the co-founder of the Stoic Fellowship. He was the co-organizer of StoiCon 2016 as we mentioned earlier. He is a member of the advisory board of Modern Stoicism, along with me. And again, I saw Catherine. I don't know who else might be on the call, but we're all on that board. He's a contributor to Stoicism Today. He's the co-author with Massimo Pigliucci of the Handbook for New Stoics, recommended reading. He is the co-author with Massimo Pigliucci and Meredith Coons of the forthcoming book, Beyond Stoicism, which I'm eagerly looking forward to next year. Ladies and gentlemen, there's lots going on. He's going to tell you even more about himself, but please help me welcome Greg Lopez.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm Greg Lopez, and thank you very much for the invitation, Phil, as well as to everybody for attending today. Like Phil mentioned, I'm going to be going a little bit into somewhat advanced Stoicism, because what the point of Stoicism is that a lot of people tend to miss when they're newer is that, well, a lot of people come into Stoicism looking to become more resilient and to feel better. But that's a little bit off base in a couple of ways. The first way is that Stoicism really isn't about feeling better. It is about quelling a subset of emotion called the passions. But the reason is not to feel better, but to be a better human being. By quelling your passions, you kind of clear the way in order to do more good in the world. And that's the second step of Stoic practice, according to the Stoic philosopher and teacher Epictetus, who had a three-step method for training that the scholar Pierre Hadot later named the three disciplines. The first is the discipline of desire, which has to do with passions. The second is the discipline of action, which is making yourself and the world a better place to the extent possible. And the third discipline is the discipline of assent, which cements your capabilities in the first two disciplines. So no new material, just more detail. And so today we're going to kind of focus a little bit on more of the action step, and specifically the realm of politics. Now, politics is on Americans' minds right now because it's a presidential election, and there are also around the world a lot of other political things. And American politics, for better or for worse, does impact a lot of the rest of the world. During my travels, I've often encountered people who know more about federal American politics than I do. And so politics is on people's minds. And so I wanted to present a way of thinking about how one could get into politics. But before I do that, I just want to make a brief aside and say that politics can be large or small. When we use the term politics nowadays, we mean more things like making legislative changes and trying to change entire cultures at the writ large within our societies. But the polis is the Greek city-state. And politics can also just have to do with making your fellow citizens around your lives, or even non-citizens, the people around you, a little bit better in whatever ways you can. And so during today's presentation, I'm going to take the opportunity and the fact that politics proper is on people's minds to focus a little bit more on that. But I do want you to keep in mind that you could make the world a better place, and that itself is politics. It's something we would call altruism, volunteerism, effective donations. Those kinds of things are all part of the political realm of taking action to make the world better if possible. And I try to be somewhat politically neutral here when I present things like this, because people can reasonably disagree about what politics works best. I think that as long as people keep everybody's interests, all of humanity's at least, if not even other sentient beings' interests in mind, you can reasonably disagree about things, because even the sage is not completely omniscient about all facts in the world. So we can reasonably disagree. However, I do kind of hope that some people are not convinced that the cats within Ohio need saving, based on recent debate rhetoric that went on. So Stoicism is undeniably about public service at the end of the day. This is one of a billion quotes and ideas I could have chosen from the ancient literature to just kind of display this fact, from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations 10:6, where he says, "The life of a citizen of any state state flows smoothly and contentedly if he spends his days acting to the advantage of fellow citizens. So this quote captures the idea that you can help people around you, and I don't think they necessarily even have to be citizens, in order to try to make people's lives a little bit more well off. And we all have different capabilities on how to do that. But Marcus's description also seems a little off to me. Like, will your life really flow smoothly and contentedly if you get into politics and try to engage the world? Well, not necessarily. Because one of the things about Stoicism is that there's no rules to follow that you have to do. There's always contingent possibilities of how you can live your life. The Stoics described the sage, the perfectly quote unquote enlightened Stoic, as possibly living one of many diverse lives depending on their station in life and who they are as a person. So not every Stoic will be Stoic in the same way. And so Seneca in On Leisure 3 gives us a quote from Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, who tells us that the sage, the perfectly enlightened Stoic, will take part in politics unless prevented by some special circumstances. Elsewhere, Seneca does remind us that the three big teachers of Stoicism that started Stoicism off, Zeno, Cleanthes, and Chrysippus, all did not get into politics proper themselves. They didn't try to run for political office. They did other things. And so there were some quote unquote special circumstances that prevented them, or they thought they could spend their time better by not getting into politics proper. Also, Seneca himself tells us in letters that we Stoics do not urge people to take up public life in any case or at all times or without qualification. So it seems pretty clear that overall, you could get into politics proper or even helping others out around you locally, but you don't have to. And so the question is, when would you and when wouldn't you? And that's what I'm going to try to answer. How to choose if, when, and how to be political. And fortunately, I don't have to do much original work here because I can lean on the work of Seneca as well as Epictetus, who spoke somewhat directly, especially Seneca and Epictetus a bit more indirectly, but still highly applicable to this question. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So Seneca in On Tranquility of Mind lays out a three-step process for determining whether and how you can get into politics, so to speak. And he does not necessarily lay out what kind of causes to choose, but some of these criteria may apply. So there's a step 0 of choosing what you think is of interest to you. But the first step in taking a look at whether you should even kind of get involved with public activity and public action is taking first a look at yourself. Seneca says, we must perform a self-assessment before all else, because we can generally think ourselves able to do more than we actually can. And so essentially what Seneca is saying is to take a look at yourself and to see what you could make a large impact in. And I think there's also a hint that maybe some people aren't at the place where they can actually make a difference. This could be due to fate. For instance, if you want to donate and you are having trouble even saving enough for retirement or paying living month to month, paycheck to paycheck, or you're currently unemployed and don't have a large savings, donation would not be a wise step for you at that particular time in your life. And that's perfectly fine. This gets back to the idea that Stoics could get involved politically unless things prevent them. And there are many things that could prevent us from doing so. And so taking a look at yourself to see if and where you could be suitable in helping others is a first step. And one of the things you could do upon this kind of self-inventory is to not get involved, to instead choose to get away from political action or even helping others temporarily, or if fate doesn't allow it, for a long stretch of time. That is perfectly fine. And so you could run away like a Stoic. Now, not getting involved and not trying to make the world better doesn't mean that you still can't practice Stoicism. And there's a particular way that Seneca recommends to withdraw and not get involved to help others. And he says this in letters to Lucilius 68. Seneca writes, when you withdraw from the world, your business is to talk with yourself. But what shall you talk about? Ponder that which you come to feel is your greatest weakness. So Seneca is telling us here, what do you think about when you've withdrawn from the world? How do you withdraw like a Stoic? Ponder your weaknesses, especially your greatest weakness. Each person knows the best defects of their own body. So it is with our souls. There are in them certain parts which are, so to speak, on the sick list. And to these parts, the cure must be applied. What then am I doing with myself, with my leisure, says Seneca? I'm trying to cure my own sores. And so if after doing step one, you decide that getting into trying to make the world a bit of a better place in whatever way you can isn't for you, this is how you kind of withdraw. You instead realize it's not for you for specific reasons, and you tend to work on yourself and aspects of your character. This goes back to Epictetus as well, who talks about the three disciplines I mentioned: the discipline of desire, the discipline of action, and the discipline of assent. And Epictetus actually mentions that the first discipline, the discipline of desire, is the most important and urgent. And because it's concerned with the passions, trying to quell this subset of emotions that make us less rational and less pro-social. And so before we get a handle on some basic passions, we're not necessarily in a good place in order to try to go out and do good. And so working on ourselves is a service to ourselves as well as the world, because we put ourselves in a better position in order to ultimately make a difference if we can make enough progress, which is on the list of preferred indifference in Stoicism. Actually, moral progress is a preferred indifference. So you may make progress, you may not, and it depends on a lot of circumstances. So, but working on yourself there's no shame in that. And many of you, during your exploration of deciding whether to make the world a better place, may decide it's not for you. And again, now you have a method by which to withdraw like a Stoic in order to take a look at yourself and your weaknesses and try to find ways to work on them. However, if you think that you're in a place to try to make a difference in society, the next step Seneca recommends in On Tranquility of Mind is to then examine your strengths. He says, we must match our strength against the affairs we are going to attempt, since the performer must always have more strength than the work requires. And so there's kind of a balancing act going on here, where on the one hand, you are taking a look at your strengths, but you're also seeing how they match against the things that you want to try to tackle. If I wanted to try to pass universal health care federally right now, given the position who I am, my time, that would be a next to impossible task, and that would be futile. The modern Stoic philosopher Larry Becker wrote a book called The New Stoicism, and he tried to build Stoicism from modern foundations. And one of the things that came about from that endeavor was something he called the axiom of futility, which he thinks is a major Stoic principle that underlies a lot of the ancient traditions that he brought to the fore. And that states essentially just don't do things that are highly unlikely or in fact impossible to do. So if you think endeavors that you're taking a look at won't have a chance of making much of a difference, then don't do them, and make sure that you have the capacities within yourself to take on whatever you think is worth taking on that you've decided in your step zero, so to speak. Epictetus, in his characteristically harsh way when he's talking to students who are a bit slow on the take, says it like this in Discourses 321. He is yelling at a student who thinks that they could take on the role of a cynic in this case, but I think the point generally applies. Epictetus chastises the student by saying, "Why are you embarking on an enterprise for which you're entirely unsuited? Leave it to those who are capable of it, to those who can carry it out with distinction." So in order to make the world a better place, you don't have to have a grand plan. If you are more suited to making smaller differences in unique situations, that's actually a better choice in trying to make a difference as a Stoic. The third and final step is to examine your possible allies. Seneca then says in Tranquility 7:1, we should in any case be careful in choosing people, checking whether they are worthy to trust with a part of our life. Because if you're trying to make the world a better place, many but not all options will involve giving a part of your life away, essentially, through volunteerism in the small p political sense, or in going and literally lobbying your local or federal or national officials, which takes a large part of your time. If you're going to go with other people, it behooves you to take a look at whether the people are well suited and have good intentions and are generally trying to make the world a better place too, or whether they are possibly doing things for other reasons. So examining your allies, taking a look for the field and choosing your allies carefully is a third and final step should you decide to get involved politically. So I'll give you an example of one thing that I've done as a Stoic over the course of the past few years and a cause that I got involved with, which is called medical aid in dying, and specifically in my state of New York. So for as some people may know, the United States is a set of states which has different laws in different states. And one of the laws on the books that was founded 25 years ago in the state of Oregon was for death with dignity or medical aid in dying, which allows terminally ill people with less than 6 months to live the opportunity to get a prescription to hasten their deaths and end their lives if they find that their terminal illness is unbearable for a variety of reasons after several checkpoints. And so this is not a law in New York. And this is a cause that I took up for a couple of reasons. And one reason is the story of Ayla Rain Eilert, who was a dancer in New York. And at 24, she was diagnosed with terminal tongue cancer. And so she degraded quite quickly. And at the end of her life, she was clawing at her throat, as you can see here, and actually wanting to die. However, since she had the misfortune of choosing the state of New York, unfortunately, to die in, she did not have that autonomy granted to her. And so I think there's a lot of cases like this, and I think medical aid in dying is kind of a no-brainer. I don't need to do technical economic analysis. There's some minor concerns that haven't panned out empirically. This is kind of a no-brainer issue. And it's a cause that I find useful as well as compatible with Stoicism and the so-called open door policy to some degree. So I've worked to try to get medical aid in dying passed in New York. But why and how did I choose to do this? And I'll give you an example of how I applied the steps. The first step is examining myself and my sores, as Seneca puts it. Generally, I do not like to be public much, which is surprising since I'm on Conversations with Modern Stoicism and have 2 books, but I attribute that to my Stoicism. That's why I kind of practice Stoicism on top of Buddhism, is because Buddhism, the kind that I practiced, does lightly encourage withdrawal, whereas I still wanted to be involved in some way, and Stoicism gave me the tools for that aspect. However, I still find tweeting painful. I feel ugh when I'm typing that tweet each time. And if you look at my Twitter, I'm on Twitter, but don't follow me because I'm boring. I will tweet like once or twice a month, and it'll either be yelling at a New York politician about medical aid in dying or occasionally announcing things like my book or Modern Stoicism. But I'm pretty boring on Twitter, and arguably in person, but definitely on Twitter. So I don't like being in the public in that way. And I also don't like political speak. It makes me feel a little nauseated when I hear politicians kind of speak the way they do indirectly, the kind of plausible deniability. I've met New York politicians who could teach Vladimir Putin a thing or two about plausible deniability by their careful, lawyerly phrasing of their positions. And I just don't like that. Stoic rhetoric is about being straightforward, saying a thing that you mean, short and sweet. And that makes me feel icky. So things that I would avoid if I wanted to get into medical aid in dying is anything that involves like using political speak in public, from running to office to perhaps even being a lobbyist or spokesperson or anything like that. Pivoting in that direction would be bad for me. At the same time, what I could do is practice on trying to cure these sores by making myself a little more public. By even doing this is a bit of a practice for me, though usually it's other things like Twitter and stuff that kind of make me nauseated. So, so actually going on, each tweet I make is kind of a practice where I try to mentally prepare myself and put it and try not to get sucked in and sometimes fail. But the point is I see my sores, know where not to do things, and try to work on myself there. But there are some ways I could possibly help. And those ways are granted to me by 3 main factors. The first is fortune. Simply, I have a story and some credibility for medical aid in dying. Both of my parents died in their 40s or early 50s of cancer, which genetically tells me that I may as well somewhat soon. And so while there's no signs of that, that is a firm possibility. And so telling that story to politicians lends me some cachet when having conversations. I also, as a doctor of pharmacy, have some medical cred and can bring that to bear as well. So my unique situations granted to me by fate sort of allow me to do this a little more effectively. I'm also in a location that matters. I'm in a self-proclaimed liberal progressive state who does not allow full bodily autonomy. They allow some autonomy for pregnant people, but they don't allow autonomy for dying people. That's hypocrisy in my view and bad ethics. So I can make a difference because I'm not in a deep state that is highly religious and conservative. I'm in a state that should in theory be practicing and letting this happen, but is not. Also, I think I have some skills. I'm a decent writer and speaker. I was invited here and I have some books, and at least some other people think so. I have doubts sometimes, but it seems like an okay hypothesis. And then there are character traits. I'm not too afraid of in-person confrontations, discussions, and debates. And so I could hit street corners, I could knock on doors, I could even confront politicians and their staff when they give me their political answers about certain things. And I could do so in a straightforward and hopefully effective manner, although I still have a lot to learn. So that allows me to maybe think about how I can act. And when I look at my allies, there are lots of nonprofits active in New York State, like Compassion and Choices, which allow me to actually go and lobby people a lot easier. And I can help them by donating and things like that. One of my weaknesses is that I'm not wealthy, so I can't make huge donations, but I do that sometimes. And I also volunteer a lot of my time for this cause. So because of fortune, skills, and character traits, as well as valid allies, I feel that medically indicting is well suited for my particular form of activism. But let's review the steps overall and see whether how you could apply it to your life. So the first step that Seneca recommends is examining yourself. Take a look for your sores. And if your sores are many or major, choose to withdraw like a Stoic and choose to work on yourself. That's okay, and there's no shame in it. And in fact, you're making the world a better place by making yourself better because you are part of the cosmos and you are part of the world. But if your flaws or sores are avoidable, try not to expose yourself, try not to pick at the scabs during your activism. Do things that avoid your weaknesses and work on your weaknesses in private. That's the first step. If you choose to go on to the second step, and again, it's a choice, not a necessity. Some people will want to stay back for a variety of reasons. Then examine your strengths and choose roles within your cause of choice that you're particularly well suited for. You're likely to be effective. Zeno of Citium talks about the goal of Stoicism being a smooth flow of life. And part of that smooth flow comes from suiting yourself to the circumstances when possible. If you align yourself with how nature is, you will have a more effective life and you will be able to make more of a difference. But at the same time, don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't say, I'm going to create a one world government unless you are close to a position of actually doing that or whatever you think is most ideal. That may be a little too ambitious depending on the data. And perhaps I'm wrong because Stoics want to be evidence-based too. Maybe you are in a position to make a huge difference, in which case that is for you, but it is not for everybody. Take a look at your strengths and try to suit them to the circumstances and roles you can play. Finally, take a look at the field of allies that you have and choose to gild good and useful allies and avoid the opposite. So that is my presentation, and now we're probably going to move on, but I do want to just hammer home a final quote from Seneca to say that it's okay to not be politically involved. It is an ideal of a Stoic to actually make the world a better place in small or large ways, however you can. However, there's a time and place for that. And as Epictetus laid out in his 3 disciplines, which not many people quite realize, but I think there's decent to strong evidence for, the 3 disciplines are meant to be sequential. You start with the discipline of desire, move on to action, and the discipline of desire clears the way for the discipline of action. But Seneca gives a nice quote to let people know that you don't have to be political yet, and you may never be, but it is something you should think about. And the quote is from On Tranquility of Mind 4.6. The effort of a good citizen is never without use. Heard and seen by their expression and nod, and silent persistence, and even by their gait, even by their walk, they are of help. So as long as you're trying to be a better person, you will be a good citizen and you will be of help, whether that is behind closed doors in private and not getting politically involved and working on yourself, or going out into the world a bit more. And with that, I will end my presentation and hand it back over to Phil.